So welcome to my discussion video where I will talk about what I think it is that a prospective player would need to do in order to get started playing Ace Racers SP. And my plan is to run the game while I do this. And then while the game is running, I'll be able to click back and forth between. So here's the game music. Click back and forth between I want to turn the music all the way down. My list and the game, and then I can discuss the game. So, in order to play the game, the player needs to race some created courses and try to get better at flying around those courses, improving their times and improving their competency with their desired controls. And ultimately, the player needs to have the best controls for the job, whatever those may be, and become successful. But it doesn't just start there, because you can't just start there. So the idea is you wanted to start there, but it's not even possible. So I created the game, and the game does not elsewhere exist. There are other games that you can play that allow you to develop some of the skills that might apply to this particular activity, but ultimately, to play this game, you have to play this one for now. That could change at any minute, but I was just looking on Steam, and to my knowledge, that has not changed yet. So as of the posting of this video, I believe that it has not changed. So you need to be having your controls working for you and flying around. And in order to do that, you need to have whatever controller you use, and you need to assign those controls. And then in order to do that, you need to be able to move about the game menus. So the first thing that the player needs to do is navigate the menus and understand the menus. The next thing that they need to do then is to assign the controls. They then need to import the training levels, play the training levels. Then they need to create levels to play themselves, play them, and then they need to export these levels for others to play. So here's the game main screen right here, and I guess it's probably a mess. Okay, so I'll come down here and I'll try to hide my face. Okay, so then looking at this game menu, you got a random hoop generator menu, a vehicles menu, a training menu, an all saved, a campaign, a create campaign, a race history, import campaign, export campaign. You can import a single level, import levels pack, export levels pack. You can change your race mesh default color. You can get some hints. You can change from windowed to full screen with these buttons right here. You can change your player name. You can change the color of your player name right here. And then there's some directions just splattered right up here on the screen. Okay, and so the only review that I've ever seen of my game is that somebody said, well, the game is incomprehensible, it's a waste of time, don't bother. So I'm going to present, it's time for me to make an argument. The game is not incomprehensible. The opening menu is capable for the person who already knows how to use it. So one thing that people do with games is they make them a beginner-only experience. And then for someone else, it's a great deal of frustration always interacting with the game. And some people are willing to put that time in, but for most people, the game turns into, well, that was actually a waste of time. Okay? You have about a small number of experiences where the game has value for you, and then there's no value in the game. You should just quit playing games altogether. This game is designed to be exactly the opposite. I am willing to compromise your ability to have a first experience in order to enable the player who genuinely wants to play this activity to have as much replay ability as possible. Okay, so for example, I want the players to be able to have a lot of control over their ship so that they can do what they think is going to give them the best experience with the ship, and also to allow them to figure out what they think the ship should really work like. Okay, so in video games, ships work whatever makes for one particular aspect of great gameplay. But in my game, you can customize a great deal of how your ship is going to move so that when you're trying to imagine the kind of ship that you want to practice, because that's what will give you the most value from your practice, this game has the ability to give you that. Okay? So you can, if you want to practice a ship that flies more realistically, and you think you understand what it is that would make that ship fly more realistically, then I want to have that available to the player. Now, this comes with a caveat, okay, and that is that I'm using the word ship, okay, and this game doesn't have spaceships in it. It has these tiny little drones, that might be this big, okay, and there's different configurations of thruster that you could put on a tiny little drone. There's a few different ones that my game represents. And so I don't mean fly through space on a large scale. And that's where a lot of realism and realism conversations come into play, is that people don't mean fly around a 30 square foot area. Okay. But some of what people mean is fly around a small area, not having to worry about orbital physics, things like that. So when all of those very local space flight mechanics are what you're talking about, then you have a fair amount of customization, that you can put onto your ship, So this way, you can have the piloting interaction that you want to have. So even if a two-dimensional scroller like Space Invaders is a better experience for someone who is at a party and they just want to kind of like not pay that much attention, and the game will walk them into it, and then they can try to mash some buttons and have a great experience, this isn't going to work that way no matter what. So I want to throw all of that out the window. I don't want to throw it out the window, but I don't have time to try to build the scale of project that is, in order to both have the easy for the master at the same time. So when somebody wants to fly good, I want them to be able to have everything that they need in order to make that happen. And that and your first onboarding experience generally tend to not be that compatible. Okay? So the player needs to be able to navigate the menus. And I need to basically create some content somehow. There are instructions here. I can work onto the instructions. I tried to make these instructions short and packed. You know what I mean? And it's got some basic instructions on what to do. If you read through them, then you may figure out what to do. But the first thing that a player needs to do is configure their controls, and you can actually do that right from the main menu. You can just go to controls, okay, and then you can start assigning your controls right here. So there's a lot going on in here. You can have various preset configurations. All right, and in this, and then you can assign your controller, right here, and you can calibrate your controller. And then here's your different controls menus. So you have your default controls. These are default is just like your basic controls, like how to navigate menus with your controller if you want to do that. Then you have your ship controls. See, and in the ship controls, there's space vehicle controls, and then there's rock hopper controls. So that is true. That's a little bit complicated. The player needs to know that if they assign their space vehicle controls, but then they want to go play one of the lunar vehicles, then they still need to go in and assign their rock hopper controls. And the reason that is that the vehicles are a little bit different in your orientation. Spaceship and an airplane are two different things, and a spaceship that is flying through space might, to the player, be a little bit different of a thing than a lander that is hovering around close to land. So you're not coming in from space and landing one time. You are flying in a hover around. So what controls you want to use, because the camera's in a different place, so therefore what's forward and reverse is different. You're going to be looking down out the belly of the ship instead of up through the. So you might want different controls assigned for the lunar vehicle. So that's all in here. And then there's just a bunch of other controls that can be helpful once you know what's going on. But those kinds of things are less important for the player to learn right away. Yeah, and then you also want to be able to figure out the keyboard controls, so that until you assign a button, or let's say your controller is like a gamepad, if you go running with a gamepad, you just aren't going to be able to assign that many controls to your gamepad. You only have 12 buttons. So then you also need to be able to look in here to see all of the keyboard buttons that are assigned to help you do everything. Yeah, and a bunch of stuff isn't even assigned because it's just not necessary for the player to do that. And then there's already so many buttons that are assigned. It starts to get to be a situation where the player needs to choose which button they're going to use if they're going to use that one. Alright, so then they need to import their training levels. So lots of games, when you download that game, all of the gameplay content is included. So the levels are part of the game. My game doesn't work that way. So there are no levels in the game at all. What my game has is a system for players to create levels, including the training levels now. Although the training levels are a little bit different, but the training levels were just created in the same level creator that the players can use. So the training levels do have some special things that go along with them that are built into the game. If the training level is playing, then there are some extra scripts that go along with those levels. But the level itself is not part of the game. The level itself is just player created content in the player content creation mechanism that you have to import just like any other player created content. So why would I do that? Why would I make it so that the training levels are player created content? Well, the training levels, as it were, the way that a player needs to learn how to fly, is not something that I can determine for everyone, So my training levels are a little bit basic and subjective. And second of all, the most important thing that a player needs to learn to do is how to import and export player created content, because all that there's going to be is player created content. So in order for them to play the game at all, step one is to learn how to import player created content, because I can't make the best racing course in the world. The best racing course in the world is going to be a big dynamic. It's going to change constantly. And the most important thing for a player who's going to access the best content for them to play is for them to be able to put that content into the game. So step one is actually importing the training levels pack. Because once you learn to import the training levels pack, you now know how to import everything else, basically. So here's the training levels pack. I could import it, but I've already done that. So you gotta just go to the import levels pack. So that's just, it's more important than actually playing the game to be able to import content. And then there's other content, and you can export. I have lots of content that I've created on my end, you know what I mean? And here's some packs that I've created. I'm just experimenting. Here's a starter levels pack. And these are levels that I created that, they're not that particularly refined, but I played and I built these levels. And if you have nothing else, I think that it's okay for these to be, I think they're pretty good. You know what I mean? All a level is an arrangement of hoops. So then you play the training levels, and that's when you start interacting with your controls, and you kind of get a feel for how the game is supposed to work. So the training levels are really basic. You just go through 1 or 3 hoops. For the rock hopper, you might try to land on a landing pad and dock to it. But the training levels are the first time that you can actually kind of drive the character or drive the ship around. Okay? So, there's a whole bunch of things that you need to do before you do that. And you might even just go blind looking at the buttons. And so that's what it is that I need to try to figure out how to make a tutorial or a Discord string or a Steam post. You can make posts directly to Steam. Okay, so I can't seem to maximize out on this window. Steam is always broken like that. Alright, so if you go to, see it's running right now. If you go to the community hub here, and you can see right away, devs, please clean up the UI. I can barely tell if it's not too hard. And then here's my guide on how to play the training levels. And here's my guide on how to import levels packs. And then here's some I posted, I'm hoping to implement, but the Steam Workshop is incomprehensible to me. That review I got, they should go check that out, huh? If I go to the store page, I have this review. It's incomprehensible. It's impenetrable. I totally disagree. It's absolutely not incomprehensible. It's just that people use these words in reviews to describe a separate kind of interaction. Every button says what it is. You know what I mean? It says right on there what the button is. I have text everywhere that tells you things about the game. So it's hard for me to understand what that is. I feel like this is a person who doesn't play space games. Their name is Space Game Junkie, and when I click on their thing, they don't play space games. They just play 2D scrollers, or games where you walk around. They're not a flying game player. They don't even know how to play flying games. Because if they did, they would have found my game easier than any game that's ever been created in the history of video games that tries to actually be a simulator. Because that's actually what I have here. So there's video games, like there's these video games that are not simulators in any way, shape, or form, and those can be pretty easy to interact with. You just get a couple of buttons and away you go. But any realistic simulator, I mean, there's so much of a learning curve. What if you went to play DCS? What if you tried to play DCS just from looking at the main menu and hoping you were going to figure it out? I mean, what if you try to play Microsoft Flight Simulator like that? You just go from the main menu and try to figure it out. I mean, when flight simulators were first coming out, they had manuals, thick manuals, with lots of pictures to help people know with confidence what they're looking at. My game, though, can offer an almost its entire experience with a very small amount of text, because the vehicle itself is so simplified, So if you're going to try to fly in space, well, you need to learn all about orbit. You need to learn all about, all the instrumentation that's associated with identifying where you are in your orbit. You need to, there's all different engines. What does your engine, work like? You know what I mean? Spaceship engines don't just like have go forward button, But my ships are tiny little drones, and they're just a gas bottle with some relay thrusters. So they actually do just, once they're on, it's like a drone, you just throttle go up, the propeller spin more, and in my case, push button more, then valve open more, and thruster go forward harder, So, I mean, I don't know what to say to a review like that. What do you even say to something like that? like, please, what? What do I say to something like that? This person needs to learn better English, so they can understand what Space Game is. They should change their name to 2D Side Scroller Junkie, and then they can make a review like that, and it would make sense. I actually have a side story. I don't actually know, but I went to this Discord and I got kicked out of the Discord for using a comma ellipses. And they told me that nobody uses a comma ellipses, and a comma ellipses has existed for hundreds of years, and it was a common way of writing, all through the 1800s. It kind of fell out of fashion in the more modern era. It's not particularly common in the more modern era, but if you read old books, they're rife with comma ellipses. And, sorry, I happen to have read a lot of old books in my life. It affected my style of text interaction. You know what I mean? I read a bunch of the classics, and in there is comma ellipses. And a comma ellipses means something different than a period ellipses. And the reason why it means something different is because a period ellipses is a very specific thing. And so if you have a dramatic pause in your text that isn't covered by a period ellipses, maybe it's covered by a comma ellipses. So he kicked me out of his Discord. I'm on a lifetime ban as far as I can tell for the crime of using a comma ellipses. And so that actually gives me a kind of a bad taste in my mouth about his ability to understand his own language, And so here he is as the Space Game Junkie, and I gotta tell you, I don't agree. You know what I mean? You are a junkie of something, I'll give you that. Everyone is. You get to be that. It's just not Space Game, Maybe if you played actual space games, then you would earn that title. But, I don't know, I kind of think they're due for a name change. Speaking of names, you might say Ace Racers SP. What kind of name is that? You know what I mean? Here we have Ace Racers as part of the name. Now, this is a name that is so common, and that's true, but if you take the SP and you go and it's over here, then it's Space Racers, which already exists as a game. And then I was like, oh. And then I moved it over here, and I was like, man, that's perfect. It has such a nice ring to it. And so then I took that name because Ace Racers SP has a really nice ring to it. If you tile it, it makes a lot of sense because then it starts to spell Space Racers. And then I kind of like Ace Racers, you could say space program or special programs, or you could like play with that if you wanted to, because presently it doesn't mean anything. It just means you took the first two letters of space and put it on the end of the word. But, there's room for development there. You could, for unofficial entertainment, there's opportunity. So anyways, what I'm hoping to do is create a bit of content somehow, be it in the game or everywhere, or in videos or everywhere, that really makes it possible for someone to understand how to navigate my menus, really makes it possible for someone to understand how to assign controls. Along with that is understanding the controls. So one thing that you can't do in my game, which I'll agree is going to be a point of frustration. I 100% agree that this will be a point of frustration, but when you're flying the ship in my game, you cannot use the mouse. The mouse doesn't work to move the ship. But part of the reason why you can't call space games simulators is because they're relying on using the mouse to control the ship. And so I have this get up over here. What a thing, and it's my controller, and it has a lot of capabilities and a lot of power. It's a very powerful system. A lot of people don't have that, and they only have a mouse. So then your game has to run on the mouse. Well, this is not a simple video game like that. And if you're going to go play the airplane video game, most people would agree that even though it's an interesting thing to try to fly the airplane with your mouse, if you're really trying to learn how to interact with an airplane, you got to go get some hardware that makes you have the amount of inputs that you need in the configuration that is useful for flying an airplane. And they didn't put a mouse in an airplane. And even after the mouse became so-called ubiquitous with electronic interaction, they still did not put a mouse in an airplane or a helicopter or a car. So, and in video games, there's some programming problems that there exist with using a mouse to play the video game, but also some aspects of the vehicle just don't really work particularly well with a mouse in the first place. And these space vehicles is one of them. So, for one thing, I just don't have the programming skills to make the mouse work that way. It doesn't work by default in the way that I like. It's just not the default mouse system for Unity. It's okay if you're playing a game where you're going to walk around and point and shoot a gun, but for my video game, it's just not useful. It's not an effective way to get a useful input. So there's no mouse tied to the ship. You could try to assign it. I never even tried. To me, the mouse is not a possibility in the current state of the game. You can get a game controller, and you will have to assign the controls yourself. No game controllers are, to my knowledge, default configured. I did try to do a default configuration, so there may be a default configuration in there, I think I had to make a default configuration that worked with Xbox controllers. So if you have an Xbox controller, it's possible that when you turn the game on and fire into the game that it'll have a default configuration. I would personally not recommend relying on a default configuration, but you can use the keyboard. And if you look in here, there is the keyboard is assigned to all the ship controls. And that is what I would recommend. You put your hand in two positions on the keyboard, not at the arrow keys, but at the QWE and at the ASD and the JKL. So WASD, and then you duplicate the WASD with your right hand on the JKL, and that gives you enough buttons to control the spaceship. And that's only 6 buttons per hand, so it's pretty easy to do that. So one problem with the mouse is you only get 2 axes on the mouse, and then you have a third axis of rotation that you want to work in the same way that your other 2 axes work, and they don't. So it's not available. And then you have to try to run 8 buttons with your left hand, which is possible. That's how people used to play Descent, which is not a flight simulator of any kind, in any way, shape, or form. Descent, Overload, any game that works like Descent is not a flight simulator. Okay? Well, so let me rephrase that. It is not a vehicle simulator. There is no vehicle that it simulates. You can argue about it's a flight simulator because you are flying a character around the digital environment. That's true. So it is not a vehicle simulator. There is no vehicle that it simulates. And I just find that between wanting to put multiple inputs at simultaneously and then trying to split up 8 buttons with one hand, I feel like the best way to do it is to have 2 hands and then have 6 buttons per hand for rotation and translation input. And I'm not very good at it, but I've had my controller the whole time. My controller's superior. I never would sit down and practice with a keyboard. There's just no sense in doing it. But some people have played like that with a keyboard, and some people got pretty good at it. And so I feel confident that some people can do it. It can be done. If that's the best option available to you, it won't be as good as the game controller that I have, because my game controller allows me 4 directions. I basically have 4 buttons for 1 stick. So instead of having one finger trying to dance around to 4 buttons, the finger just stays on the button and drives 4 buttons at once, and in varying degrees of input. I'm aware that not everyone's going to be able to build their own custom game controller that has enough inputs to play this kind of game. But when you go back and you look at how incomprehensible my game is, you have to remember that there's not even a good way in modern games to play 6 axis. You know what I mean? There's you can buy some pretty significant HOTAS setups, and even those are not configured for good 6 axis. So there's actually not even a good 6 axis controller on the market. There is the Space Mouse, but it's hard to even control 2 axis on one finger. Controlling 6 axis off of one pad input thing, it's going to be really hard to not accidentally push other inputs at the same time. So while I think the Space Mouse is cool and good, I don't think that it is ultimately going to be what people decide is the best all-around 6-axis controller. I think that the best basic all-around 6-axis controller is a 4-joystick controller with 2 joysticks on top and 2 joysticks on the bottom. Just like that. I can't, I need to turn that blacky thing off on my camera to do this. Yeah. And that lets you do quite a bit, actually. And it's easy to learn. And there's an easy training wheels way to learn it. So anyways, I'm going to call that a video. Here's my list. I'm not sure how to go about making these things. I don't know if I should just make a video. I don't know what I should do. I'm hoping that I figure out a good way to go about each thing. But I'm not going to edit videos. I'm not very good at making videos in the first place. A video like this just goes on forever with a lot of rambling. It's not a good way to make a tutorial video. I mean, I can put text in the game, but any more than a paragraph is technically too much text. I have these hints around, and I try to make things descriptive when you're looking at it, you know? So, I mean, and there's an instructions, and it does give you some step-by-step instructions for some of the stuff. It tells you what to try to do. You know, it's in there, you know. But I understand that most people aren't going to be interested in such in-depth, you know, gameplay, but that's not what this game is about, you know. This game is about those people who are. And I mean, maybe there's just none, and I'm the only one, you know. And that's perfectly possible. But we'll see what happens, I guess. If I figure out a good way to make a video, then I'll try to do that. If I reread these instructions and think I can make some changes, then I will.